You wanna grow and go and get there. Sometimes upward, sometimes nowhere. You've got the ideas, you're looking up at the clouds. But how do you start standing out of the crowd? So build it with us from the ground up.
Hey everybody, welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm Zach Conway. I'm here with Kelsey, McKenna. Today we've got an interesting topic. We are talking about something that was sort of hotly debated on LinkedIn that we've been paying attention to over the last couple of days. So we'll start with a stat that sort of kicked off this debate on LinkedIn. And the stat that someone shared was that 9 out of 10 advisors, financial advisors, basically churn out of the industry. They quit within 3 years of starting. And so I think there's so many reasons. Part of the reason this LinkedIn post became such a debate is there's a lot of reasons or theoretical reasons why that would be the case. We kind of want to hone on one particular area today that, Kelsey, you and I have been talking about is, I think, so critical and a major component of why that may actually be the case. So I'll pass it to you. What do we want to sort of hone in on that stat?
Yeah, so I think all of the debate was really interesting to read through, all of the comments on the original post. But
Sassy
I think
advisors.
just a lot of a lot of sassy advisors coming in with their opinions on this, and there was valid points in almost all of them. So it's not like any of that was wrong. But I think what we wanted to just hone in on is uh, it's so difficult. Basically, it's really, really hard to start something new or to be a new advisor in this industry. And you can be a great practitioner, you can be an amazing advisor, but if you can't, you can also like have a great website, you can have great marketing, you can have the best tech stack, you can have all of these things going for you. But if you can't get those first few customers in the door and learn from those customers to then refine what you're offering, your product and service offering, and the experience that you deliver, to then continue to feed that beast of how can I better position this, how can I better and more cheaply acquire customers, then you're pretty much screwed, I guess. You'll fail out just like you would in a startup. So there's a lot of overlap with founders in the startup world as well, where so many founders also fail out, and they have to eventually just give up because it doesn't work. So we wanted to really hone in on those beginning, that really early stage, trying to acquire those first few customers and learn from them. And what are some things that we've learned from working in startups, but also from advisors that we've worked with, and then for you being an advisor, of course, as well.
Yeah, I think, you get the benefit. I'm sort of jealous of you being able to sit into these advisor meetings you have on a daily basis, in your role at Seeds and talk to these young advisors in particular who are trying to build their businesses from the ground up. And as you said, they're putting all these incredible things in place, the foundational elements. They really understand, I need to hone a persona. I need to know who I'm selling to, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
true of any business. And I'll come back to your point on, how we think about it at Seeds for ourselves. But they know what persona. They start to figure out, okay, how does my offering, what problem does that persona have? How does my offering match that? What's my brand identity to kind of tell that story to the market? And what I think is sort of maybe ironic to the theme of our podcast about how important those foundational principles are. At the end of the day, you just said it, but there's an element of just scrappiness that's really needed to get initial momentum. And back
Mm-hmm.
on that stat, again, 9 out of 10, especially for advisors who are, attempting to really kind of do it out on their own in the beginning of their career, dragging people into the door and creating revenue pretty much however possible so that you can sustain and continue to build and continue to calibrate, I think is the sort of intangible that advisors, or again, any person starting a new business, doesn't realize quite how important and difficult that is, right? And the scrappiness that's necessary to literally just figure out, how do I get a flippin' paying customer in the door to create
Right.
initial traction and move the ball forward? So yeah, that's, again, you're in these conversations every day with these advisors. You can have a beautiful website, but at the end of the day, how do you get that initial momentum, kind of get things rolling, and then everything can kind of build from there and calibrate from there.
Yeah. I think that A lot of the advisors that I talk to who are very early on, they do start with people that they know, which I think is the advice that is given across, all industries, not all, but most industries. So in startups, it's the same thing. You really want to start where you can and keep that cost of acquisition low. You don't want to just start with marketing out into the void of the internet and try to attract that first customer that way because, well, for a number of reasons. One is if you can start with a friend or a family member or someone that already has some trust in you, then you have room to kind of test things and really make sure that, and they'll be more honest with you on feedback versus just leaving and going to the advisor down the street. So there's a lot of benefits from starting there, but I do think and most advisors I think do this very well. I do think that most advisors I talk to, it's not like I talk to a lot of advisors who don't have any clients at all. I think for what I notice the most is making that transition from having a few or a small set of friends and family customers, maybe a few referrals, to creating a sustainable like inbound source of prospects and leads, which is a very big topic. There's a lot that goes into that, which I'm sure we'll dive into a lot of elements of this in future episodes. But one thing that's so important, I think personally, is just making sure whether you're in a startup or an advisory business that those first few customers are informing the experience and the offering that you will then be pitching and marketing and selling and delivering more broadly as you grow. But before we dive into all of that, I do want to say there are a lot of advisors I talk to who aren't looking to grow beyond their own, what they can handle as an advisor. They're not looking to do what we talk a lot about in this podcast, which is kind of continue to grow and build and scale. So this doesn't necessarily apply to every advisor. I just want to call that out. If that's not your goal, to grow kind of beyond your own, what you can manage, this may not apply to you, because you may very well be able to make it off of just friends and family and a few referrals here and there. But yeah, I think that's the thing that's the most interesting to me that I'm seeing a lot of, which is like, I've got this far, but how do I take it to the next level and actually get leads and work those leads and convert them into customers?
Yeah, there's so much, I think we can come back to kind of like the silver bullet. There's all like some piece of technology, and we've touched on this before, but some piece of technology is going to solve my sort of lead generation problem from the get-go, right? And if I build it, they will come, or maybe I just need one more sort of, marketing lead gen tool I'll pay for to start to get them in the door. And I do think, again, those initial moments and the scrappiness to just find people to test this thing that you're building, and hopefully the added benefit of putting some revenue onto the books as well to sustain and continue to calibrate, is that intangible, really difficult thing at the beginning that, again, I think the industry kind of has a tendency to overlook the degree of difficulty and how scrappy in many cases you need to be. I want to point out too, you pointed out the friends and family thing, right? It's like literally who's in your immediate network where you can say, hey, I'm building this thing, whether it's an RIA or anything, or a startup like Seeds. Will you be a user and help me try to figure out exactly what I am building or how I should be calibrating what I'm building moving forward? So there's no shame in that game, right? I think advisors have a tendency, and again, just people in the startup world have a tendency to say like, oh, those don't count, right? Like if I'm wrangling initial customers because, they're blood relatives, then it doesn't move the needle, and maybe investors don't think it counts, and you get down on yourself in that way. And I don't think that's the case. I have no shame, and we're very public and honest about our wealth management business was the first customer of Seeds, right? It was the first user of what we're building at Seeds. No shame in that. It's been an amazing jumping off point. We're extremely lucky in that regard, right? I always have to point that out. But what an amazing start. And I don't discount the value of that. In fact, it's informed so many things about how we're building the platform to now serve and, get momentum and serve advisors moving forward. So, family members, people down the street in your communities that you've known your whole life, they count. They're important initial moments to figure out what the heck you're doing in your business. Even if you think you have everything so well defined, the only way to test it is to actually get people in the door and test it. And the only
Yeah.
the one other thing I'll mention is just wrong personas, and maybe this is where you were headed. Those are okay too, right? If
Hmm.
you're bringing people in the door that are not necessarily the perfect match for the thing that you think you're building with your business and what your offering is, that's okay, because it's
Hmm.
still going to inform, wow, maybe my persona should be tweaked a little bit in this way, or my
Yeah.
offering needs to be tweaked in a different way. So, wrong persona, blood relatives, no shame in that game. It's just momentum building to try to get going. And again, start to calibrate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in startup land there's a phrase, get outside the building. So you never want to spend so much time creating your product and creating your offer and thinking about pricing and marketing and brand before anyone's actually given you feedback or seen it or tried to use it. I think the same rule applies, and that's why it's so important to be able to go out into your community, your family, your friends, that network where you already have some credibility, and land those first few customers so that you can really hone what you're doing. And I think that's something where, like you mentioned, they might not be the right persona fit. You might not even know who your persona is going into that process, and that is totally fine. You may stumble upon, oh, this one old family friend who is a doctor. I actually worked very well with this person, and I totally understand where they're coming from, and I love handling all the nuances of what they have going on in their lives. So that may inform then what you want to focus on going forward as you grow. So there's definitely inspiration there, and there's a lot of testing and iterating that's happening. I think the point is just knowing that having a customer doesn't mean you're done. If you really do want to create something different and different, or something differentiated, and create something that you can market and then sell and then service consistently and scale up over time, you're not done after you get those first few family and friend customers. You can't just go out into the world as an advisor and then say, hey, I did this, and have everyone flock to you. So I think making that transition and knowing, going into that family friends offering, knowing what you're looking for, what insights am I trying to gather? Why am I gathering them? What am I going to be iterating on as I go through this process of servicing these first few customers, so that I can come out on the other side of kind of getting those clients through their onboarding process and know this is how I'm going to position what I do. These are the pain points that I'm going to speak to. This is who I'm talking to when I'm marketing or selling or servicing clients. Here's how I can make the experience better. Here's how I can differentiate. That's really what we're looking to get out of. And I would love to dive deeper into some of that, but just at a high level, that's kind of how I like to think about it, of making that transition.
That transition's so critical, and you're making me think of, again, everything's really hard. But if you get that initial momentum, so I'm going to sort of talk out of both sides of my mouth with the persona fit thing, right? So that initial persona, or the personas of the initial people you're wrangling to get in the door to create that momentum, if they're not a match, right? If the
Mm-hmm.
personas, if the people you're talking to are not reshaping your opinion about who your persona should be, and you're saying, okay, my offering and the persona I really want to be speaking to is not this, then
Mm-hmm.
there is that, transition moment, or you really have to remain steadfast in saying, you could spend the next 40 years of a career on the wrong track of who you're talking to, is where I'm headed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could say, you know what, I got some traction with whatever, let's go with, the doctor down the street, even though I was building a business around whatever, firefighters, and a totally different sort of persona
Yeah.
and offering approach. um, you have no background in being a doctor, but all of a sudden you're building a practice around doctors because you got the first one in the
Mm-hmm.
door. So there is a
Yeah.
calibration moment really early on where it's momentum, but it could also be a slippery slope in a persona and offering direction that you didn't intend to go. So
Yeah.
how does
And
that
we see that a
inform that?
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's such a fear of like, I don't want to turn anyone away. I think that's the number one reason I see advisors not wanting to go out into the world and say, this is who I serve and how I serve them, is they don't want to miss out on opportunities. They don't want to make anybody feel like they're not for them. But I think in doing that, you actually do the opposite, which is you make everybody think that you're just for everybody. And then they can go find an advisor who is specifically for them, especially in this remote world now where a lot of clients are open to working with an advisor who's not in their local community. So I do think that you can easily kind of be pushed, like just blown with the wind, and not
Right.
be intentional with this if you don't go into this process knowing that you're trying to find that sweet spot of what you want to offer, where you feel like you can uniquely provide value to a certain demographic, a certain type of customer, and then learning from all your other customers and using all those customers, even if they're not in that persona, to provide you with inspiration for what you do want to deliver, what you don't want to deliver, how you do want to talk about things, how you don't, all of that stuff for sure.
Yeah, and that's been sort of our journey, I would say, with seeds. Of I had a pretty clear idea who I thought the persona advisor was in what the seeds offering is, right? And sort of a
Mm-hmm.
very growth minded, thinks about delivering an experience in a meaningful way to the end consumer, is not certainly not sort of product selling focused or have a mentality of sort of and we've talked a lot about selling investment management as a even though it's commoditized, selling it as a value proposition. So avoiding those types of personas. And so some of our earliest customers arguably were in imperfect alignment, right? But they were coming in the door, so we could have said, well, let's just keep selling to whoever walks in the door and address their specific needs. And then all of a sudden your offering and your product just gets sort of like shotgunned. It just
Mm-hmm.
becomes too not
You're
honed.
trying to serve everybody.
You're trying to
Yeah.
serve everybody. And
You're
so
too small to do that. Yeah.
again, it informed now the Conway business, to point out, is a persona fit, but the other ones that arguably were less so, again, thank God we had them. It created momentum in the business, but it gave us information as to then actually how to better speak to the personas that we initially thought we wanted to be building toward. And now we're
Mm-hmm.
finding that success in finding those types of advisors. But we had to be pretty steadfast. Again, it's like this catch 22 or two sides of the coin, whatever analogy works best, I guess. You have to be somewhat dogmatic in, I think I'm building a thing that speaks to this buyer, and at the same time, especially early on, allowing people that don't necessarily fit that and trying to gather as much information from them that would inform how to build toward the persona that you're actually trying to build toward, which is tough,
Mm-hmm.
right? Trying to do both things
Yeah.
at the same time. And we've done it
So,
imperfectly, for sure.
oh yeah, and you can risk going there. There is like a very nice little tipping point where you do need to hone in and stop taking wrong fit customers, because it does create a situation where you have to overservice them because it's not what you're building. So then you're having to make up for like not having the exact offering for that persona. And this is, I think, why some firms struggle to scale as well, because they've gone down this path too far and they now are serving 5 different types of customers that all have slightly different needs and they're in slightly different life stages and all that stuff. But they're not big enough yet. They don't have enough customers to sustain having that many different types of offerings and positioning and service models and all of that. So they're just kind of reacting. And that's why I did want to like simplify this a little bit and make it really clear. And again, we're not experts in this. This is from our experience. But the two things, if you're going into this process, you maybe have a handful of customers and you're looking to take it to that next step, or even if you're an established business and you're looking to kind of create a new pathway to growth, maybe a new type of demographic that's going to kind of build some growth for you, some organic growth, I would say focus on your offering and your experience. Those are the two things that you should be really thinking about as you're working through every single interaction, every single moment, every single experience that you're having. Experience and offering, those are the things you're kind of honing, just to keep it really simple. So that offering is like what you are offering. So what are the products and services you're offering and how are you talking about them and what do you charge for them? So that whole little package. And then the experience is how you are doing this. So how are you talking about this one to many, if more broadly on your website, in your marketing, any marketing that you're doing, one to one in the sales process or prospecting, and then as a customer. So looking at it through those two lenses and really trying to take those two things and hone in on how you can improve them, tighten them up, make them better, which I have a lot of thoughts on how you actually do that. But those are the two things that I like to focus on. I don't know if you have more that you would say.
Yeah, and I'm breaking it down in my head, and I think where you're headed is like there's the advisors who are just starting out, and it's the being careful to not think if you build it, they're automatically going to start to come into the business. And again, needing those, if you define all the things you just described, still needing to be scrappy to pull people in the door. So that's like, day one, just starting out advisors.
Yeah.
And then to your point, the other camp of legacy firms, you built it, a bunch came, you built a business, you built a cash flowing business, but that doesn't mean that they're going to continue to walk in the door. And
Right.
your, how you maybe honed or didn't hone a persona, but still were successful in spite of that, how your offering was somewhat sporadic because you had multiple personas across the business, and the tactics that got the people in the door, dragging them in. I was sharing with you this morning, Mike talks about, my dad, Mike, in the wealth business, talks about, they had a pretty honed persona, an offering that they honed over time. But the tactic was literally in the early days grinding out cold calls to people,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a non-starter these days from a sales tactic. Verizon says robocall or whatever when your phone
Yeah.
rings. It's not a way, even at scale volume, to try to cold call people and sell financial planning is nearly impossible. So the reset for legacy firms across the board, to your point, is the persona, even if you're a 40-year-old business, is the persona going forward honed enough? How does the offering need to adapt? And then now, what are the new tactics to try to get people in the door? They essentially have the same problem as the 30-year-old advisor that's just trying to build the business from zero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like, and that's harder too, I think, to your point of when
Yeah.
we talk to some of these firms that are more established and with really incredible advisors that have a lot of experience in the industry, it's that much harder to sort of politely convince them that all those things that were working before that got to this point with that demographic of your client base is you basically have to not quite start over, but you really need to rethink or reassess all of it and get scrappy again. What's the next thing
Yeah.
to get the next client in the door? But one other point I'll make on that is, once you've created momentum and the referral flywheel begins, right? We talk about getting escape velocity. You have enough of a core set of business that at some point your scrappy in the market tactics are less important because you're getting referrals out of your business. But at some point, in theory, even with, Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees of separation or whatever, you are going to plateau in that
Mm-hmm.
referral ability. And so again, it's like going back out there as a legacy firm. How do I get somebody that's not somebody's cousin from our existing client base, but is a brand new, fresh face with new honed persona, honed offering, new scrappy tactics that you've roped them in with?
Well, yeah, because you're getting that first. If you're a small firm, you're getting that small little batch of clients. You're learning from them, and then you're going out and saying, okay, this is who I now serve, and you're trying to get referrals to those types of people. So you're trying to uh, get referred most of the time. I think is what advisors are doing to those types, right? Then, so say it's small business owners. So I'm going out, I'm trying to land more clients who are small business owners. And then as I'm bringing in that first wave of small business owners who I believe my offer and my experience is geared toward, I'm further iterating upon that. So it's not over once you land those first few. Those first few are so critical to honing in on exactly how to make this the best offer and the best experience that you can provide so that you are really offering something differentiated. So if you think about like the offer itself and positioning, the reason it's so important to know who you are delivering that offer to is because you need to speak directly to the pain or the issues that they are experiencing when they decide they need a financial advisor. So everything should not be broad. It should not be I do financial planning for small business owners. It should be very, very specific on here are the deliverables, here are the specific services that we offer to our small business owner clients, and this is what we charge. And you should know from experience of working with small business owners that works for them and that they're getting value out of those services and that it is providing a good experience. So that's like the offer itself. The experience, what you're iterating on there with those first few customers is this an experience where I am being proactive? Am I being as proactive as possible? So anything in those first few customers and beyond where you're finding you and your team are in a reactive state, where someone's surprising you, that's a moment to take note. And we're going to go loop back on that either by yourself if it's just you or with your team to try to address and make sure that's something that we're addressing proactively as much as possible. And then my other point, which I've made before, I think in one of these podcast episodes, is am I outweighing feelings of loss with feelings of gain? So, in my experience overall, from the moment that you come across my brand and me and my team, are feelings of gain outweighing feelings of loss? And that's the most simple way that I can put it. So, advisors need a lot of data. I run into this a lot. They need a lot of data points to do what they need to do effectively, right? That doesn't feel good to customers. It can feel good, but it doesn't always feel good. You have to very carefully craft that experience to be delivering value on your website, in your marketing material, on webinars, wherever they are, you go there, you deliver value one to one. You continue to deliver value by anticipating what they're going to need and making sure, that you are kind of ahead of their need. And then in this experience going forward as a customer, same thing. We need information from you. We need statements. We need data. We need you to sign papers. We need a lot of stuff from you. So what are you giving back throughout this whole process? What is giving them feelings of comfort, of satisfaction, of clarity, whatever it is that they're seeking? How are you alleviating that pain and making sure that they feel like they're winning in the relationship as well? So those are kind of like the offering and experience and how you can kind of hone it, but it's not done once you get that first batch of customers. They're the ones who are going to help you hone it so that you can then go back out to the market and say even more clearly, this is how I will serve you. And this is why it'll be a good experience to work with me.
Yeah, you can't waste valuable information from your customer. And I think, this is a whole topic of why as an industry, we don't focus more on sort of the NPS score, the raving fans aspect of the information we can gather from our customer base. But again, it's so important. Certainly when you're an established business and there's tweaks to be made with your clients who've been with you for 10 years, but those initial customers, as we're talking about, even if in your mind they're not a persona fit, how is the persona? How should you be tweaking the persona potentially? To your point, the offering, is it matching the problem set? But then the minutia of how you're delivering the offering from an experience perspective, your quote unquote process. You got to bum people out with, I need a lot of data to do the things I need to do for you. It literally comes down to what words are you using in what meetings with what information gathering system that can hope, potentially eliminate some of those feelings of loss, to your point. But yeah, I think the takeaway there is like, don't try to get as much feedback, whether it's expressed from the person directly or indirectly, because it's such valuable information early on. You're going to put in all the scrappy work to try to wrangle somebody in the door that may not be a perfect fit for the business. Don't waste that effort on, not absorbing that information and trying to calibrate around what you're figuring out.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard this. I constantly quote things that I don't know where they came from, but it's the quote of the customer is not, it's my quote. I'm quoting myself now. The customer is not always right, but they are always inspiration. So like being on the customer side of tech companies, it's just as true as it is in financial advisory space. So a customer may come to me, be very frustrated or very upset about something. It doesn't mean that that specific thing that they're complaining about or needing is something that we need to run off and deliver immediately. It doesn't necessarily mean that may not make sense for the business today, but the fact that they were there in the room or using our product and they experienced that is a useful data point that should be considered because something went wrong, whether it was that they were the wrong fit or we set the wrong expectations or something would cause that sort of friction to occur. So I think it is important to make sure that like you are going into this with that open, just being open to that feedback and expecting it and actually cherishing it and not being precious with your initial vision for what you thought your service offering would be or what you thought your pricing would be or whatever, right? Like we can't be precious with this if we really are trying to build something that is going to be easy to grow and expand upon over time.
I think you're touching, this may sound sort of like overly nuanced maybe, but you're touching on this information gathering thing, the information may not be what it is at face value. In other words, like,
Yeah.
in seeds, we hear a lot of uh, very specific product feedback about like where a button is in the system, or,
Hmm.
something in terms of the user experience that we could react and say, okay, we have to move this button over here. But
Right.
oftentimes there's more to the information that we're trying to suss out. And certainly the benefit of having many users who maybe are echoing similar things, but oftentimes like what we think we're hearing in terms of information, you have to kind of take a beat and try to assess what it actually means before you just, again, to your point, you
Hmm.
you react, you move the button in a different place, you tweak your process slightly because one or two or three of your new customers, had a question about a question you asked them in the discovery or meeting or whatever it may be. But what are they actually indicating? Maybe it's not that you asked the wrong question, maybe you asked the questions in the wrong order, or you should have done the discovery meeting sooner, or you didn't,
Yeah. Or you could have set expectations before you dove
right.
into the
They could
questions
have,
about why they're important.
exactly, they could have looked at, sort of expectations of what information you needed to have prior to the meeting. Whatever it may be, sometimes that like face value information, especially early on with imperfect personas, you kind of have to take a beat and be like, what am I actually hearing
Yeah.
in this moment? um
Yeah. And why? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, the one other thing I wanted to touch on for a second is just the nature of the industry, and we've talked about this before, but the fundamental value proposition of what we do as advisors is arguably hard to articulate and quantify. And I do
Hmm.
want to kind of caveat this, like, you got to be scrappy and figure it out and wrangle people in and get everything right, and then, work your butt off to find people. The reason we're saying that is because it is that difficult. It's not, um, people who have a specific financial problem may be seeking to solve that specific financial problem. But in general, there's a mismatch of that specific pain point, whatever it is that's happening in their lives in that second. They're going, holy crap, I got to figure out how to solve this. And then
Hmm.
whatever your offering is as a financial advisor is generally going to be much broader and comprehensive than that. I use the
Yeah.
analogy, it's like you have a leaky faucet, you go on Angie's List or whatever, or, from your neighbor down the street, who's the plumber, because I need a plumber right now this second to fix the leak in the kitchen. And so it is, I think, just kind of caveating this, you got to go be scrappy thing. It's because that connection of problem and solution set is not that fundamentally understood by the consumers, right? Generally, the consumers of what we do as advisors, there's an educational element after you drag them in the door to say, of course, I'm going to solve this specific pain point that my offering touches, but have you thought about these 30 other things, in the future of your financial life that may be issues moving forward? So that's part of why it's so darn hard to do it,
Yeah.
because again, that pain, that acute pain, there's not necessarily like a clear acute match in terms of what
Well,
we
and
do.
there should be. And that's exactly what we're talking about. And I actually, this is something that I do have some opinions on. So everyone take it or leave it. But
Rabbit hole.
it could be a rabbit hole. But basically, where I struggle, I think, when I'm working with advisors who are positioning too broad because they don't want to scare anybody away. They want to be this like broad, I do all of this for you and I do all of this for everyone, right? The reason that that is difficult is because of what you just said. You do then have to be very scrappy and very, very tailored to the person in the room every single time. I think that it's worth attempting, and you can test this if you're not wanting to go full in on this, but I do think it's worth attempting, trying to find ways to identify that core problem. Maybe there's three typical things. Like, say that you think you're going to focus on small business owners. Maybe there's three typical things that middle of their life, when they're finally reaching that amount of investable assets that would make them relevant and a good customer for you. Maybe there's three different things that they may be thinking about, right? It's so important, no matter, in my opinion, what business you are, that you deliver value early and that you reduce complexity and you tell them, this is how I will meet your needs. You go out proactively and say to them, this is how I will do this for you once they're in the door. More broadly in your marketing or on your website, it should also speak to that. It should say, hey, you may be thinking about this, and don't talk about, I see so many advisors talking about, oh, I get a lot of questions about Social Security. Here's my thoughts on Social Security. Oh, I get a lot of questions about 401k, blah, blah, blah. Here's my thoughts on that. That's not what they're thinking about. Those are the tactics and the things that you specialize in that you will then use to help them get to their outcome that they're seeking. But ask yourself why. Why does this person care about this? Why would they care about my opinions on Social Security? And keep asking why until you get to some kernel of like a human emotional truth that you can speak to, that then after you've addressed, hey, you may really be afraid of this, you may really be scared of that, you may really, that's where you should start when you're one to many, because people are not scrolling or looking at websites or Googling around like which advisor is going to have the best opinion on this specific financial planning tactic or whatever, right? They're thinking about themselves and their lives. And that's why it's important to know who you're talking to when you're one to many and when you're one to one, so that you can be more on the rails and you can know their world more intimately. And then when they give you a hint at what's really going on, you can then immediately say, okay, this is exactly how I will help you with that pain. And once they're a customer, you get that win early. You deliver that value early. You build trust. You keep your promise, right? You don't then dive into, let's do this huge thing you didn't ask me to do. And I know that the business model itself, there's a ton of questions about how does this work like financially within a business. So I totally understand that. But at a high level, that's something that I think, and I know easier said than done. So feel free, push back on me. But
Well, I think what you're touching on, again, whatever the scrappy early tactics are to get people to just get in front of people. It's family and friends. It's, and we've seen, especially young advisors, there's an approach of like, let me build market credibility first. Let me go, put
yeah,
time and money and effort into building a massive Twitter following. And that's fantastic. But you need to build a really meaningful footprint before any meaningful traction, people start raising their hand and walking in the door asking for your services. So that's an approach too, right? You just build a following, build credibility,
yeah,
build content. I think the point there is just have an understanding of what that's really going to take to actually start to get traction and people walking in your door. More typically, you need to be proactively selling one way or the other through your centers of influence, your family and friends, really scrappy tactical approaches. But on your point, you can't go walk into a room, whatever opportunities you get to get in front of people, and just pitch and just sell. And, this is particularly true like in the insurance industry, where you're just getting in front of people and pitching an insurance product, let's say, or whatever particular product. And maybe we've skipped over the obvious thing that we should point out, which is, and you just touched on it, what's their problem? Ask the question. You get the opportunity
yeah.
to be
Why
in
are
front
you
of
here?
somebody. Why are you even spending the time with me? Because whatever, kernel of information you can get about their specific pain, that's what you go attack. That's what you go spend time on addressing. You don't just, get opportunities to get in front of people and do your product pitch and do your sort of financial planning, selling, pitch deck. You need to ask the right questions, figure out the angle of where they have very specific pain so you can speak to that. And then, as you said, get them on the rails. Then how do I fix that problem? And maybe my broader service offering comes later and we evolve into that over time. But don't miss the opportunity to get the information the moment you're in front of them to figure out how to speak to them about, exactly how you can fix their problem.
Yeah, and serve them. And you may need something added to your business model to be a softer entry. Instead of going from zero to full planning client, there may need to be a tier of service where you're offering some sort of like paid consultation on a very, very specific issue that they may have in their lives. And
Right.
that's your moment to build trust. And that's kind of an entry point to a higher offering. It's just like in tech. I'm not going to try to sell you an expansion on your SaaS subscription. unless you are already getting the value that you expected to get out of the initial subscription that you already agreed to. So it's the same idea, just as in any other business. It's just, I think with financial advisory businesses, there is sometimes, and not always, because I've seen some firms doing this very well, but there is sometimes this like all or nothing approach. Either you are my customer and you need everything, or you're not. You know what I mean? And I can't work with you. And there is a lot of data there and a lot of valuable insight that can be gained. And your cost of acquiring that customer may go down if you do have a tiered offering, because it's easier to get that in the door win. And then if they're a good fit, they upgrade into your full planning offering or whatever it is,
So much to get right. It's really hard. That's that.
It's really hard is the point.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the takeaway. It's really, really difficult. But again, I think a major takeaway is just try to you need to be scrappy early on, and you need to absorb as much information and sift through it as quickly as possible, and then calibrate. Am I talking to the right personas? Is my offering a match? Is my experience driving those feelings of gain? And you go from there. I think there's also a zillion other topics that we will cover coming out of that
Yeah.
statistic about, sort of broadly as an industry, why are we failing as an industry these young advisors? So I think
Yeah.
it's an episode more to come on that. But before we get out of here, Kelsey, what are you learning, excited about? What's going on?
Yeah, I've actually been learning. I listen to this podcast called Founders, and they do these really in-depth, like 2 to 3 hour episodes on founders, where the guy, he reads like all the biographies and all of the things he can read about a founder, and then he tells the entire story and all the takeaways. So it's a very intense podcast. So you just can kind of have it on the background and absorb. But I've been listening to the Oprah episode, which he put out recently, and Oprah actually doesn't. There's not a lot of biographies out there, so he had to get this information from a bunch of different places. But one of the things that I've been really focused on, that I've noticed throughout the whole episode on Oprah, is just like her presence. And it's something that I've realized in my meetings with advisors. I try so hard to be present with them, because it is so important that, like everything we talked about in this episode, that you're really paying attention to all of the cues. It's not just about what they're saying directly to you, it's everything else. So I'm really trying to focus on that across all of my other meetings internally, because I think when we're living in this remote world, it's really easy to just be in these remote meetings all day and not be fully present. But it's so critical for making sure that you're making the most of all of these opportunities to connect with your teammates and with your customers and all that stuff. So that's what I've been kind of like really focusing on this week. Again, it's another nerdy one. I don't have anything exciting to share. It's just more nerdy stuff in the workplace and team building and stuff like that.
It's a good one though. And it goes back to, so that presence thing, like at the end of the day, we say it all the time. People, our customers, our team members, our families, people just want to feel heard and understood. And if you can ask good questions and shut up and listen and be present, it's so powerful. The other thing on Oprah, apropos of this topic today, is like her early shows and what she was doing in the show business was so not what she's doing now. And I'm sure she had a vision of, what her career trajectory was supposed to be, but it was a lot of scrappy sort of nonsense in the beginning that she had to figure out and calibrate to get to where she is.
And she is, like, one interesting thing about her, and this is similar to a lot of other like founder stories, but she really did decide at a certain point early on in her career that she was going to go with what felt really right. And I've heard that in so many other founder stories, and I think it's such a great thing, because I do think we tend to overcomplicate. Like, even in this episode, we're talking about all the frameworks that you need, and you need to have all the right frameworks, you need to have all the skills, you need to have all of those things. But at the end of the day, so much of this is just about like a human feeling, whether it's what your customer's feeling, what you're feeling, like your intuition, informed by all of this stuff, and like put in some framework that you've got in your head. But there's so much to be said about just the simplicity of really focusing on the human side of everything, whether it's just you managing yourself and your own career and your own family life, or if it's you trying to help a customer achieve something that they set out to achieve.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes to zoom out and just how would they feel if I did it this way? Not
Yeah.
this is like the
Just be
playbook
in
of
their
the
shoes.
process that I should do because I was told that's how it should work. It's just how would this other human react to the way I'm going to take them through this experience? Um,
Yeah, for sure.
that's sort of a good segue to my thing. So it's I'm reading. My wife got me for Christmas "Think Again" by Adam Grant.
Mm.
So a great author. This book, if you're not aware, is really about we know nothing. Me and Kelsey specifically know nothing. So thanks for
We know
listening.
absolutely nothing. Yeah.
Um,
Thanks for making it this far.
thanks for making it this far. But what it's about is uh, we can become so dogmatic in what we believe is right? Whether
Yeah.
it's in our relationships, how we run businesses, certainly our political ideology. We get so entrenched, and this is arguably more true for people who think a lot and spend time on ideas. uh,
Mm-hmm.
you get entrenched in those ideas and they drive everything you do. It guides what you do in your business, it guides what you do in your relationships, how you talk about politics, all these different things. And the point of the book is it is so confirmation bias is so powerful, like a lot of cognitive biases, that you really have to empower yourself to try to break out of it as often as possible and say, he talks about unlearning whatever you think
Yeah.
you've learned that's right. Pause, because maybe it's not. Maybe it still
Mm-hmm.
is. There's a good chance it
Maybe it's
still
right
is.
for certain situations and not right in others,
That too, right? And so you apply these beliefs and these belief systems that you're so entrenched in, and it guides everything you do across your life and in business. It's really, really important to gut check everything. It can
Mm-hmm.
change how you think about politics. It can think about how you're running your business. It can think about your behavior in your relationships, all of these different things. We kind of need to unlearn the things we're most dogmatic about, which is really,
Mm-hmm.
really hard. Um, but it's kind of like the scientific approach, right? It's just you're constantly retesting what you've presumed
Yeah.
to be true. Otherwise, again, maybe you're headed in generally the right direction, but you're going to be off the mark to some degree because none of us are 100% right on everything we think we're right
Yeah.
about. So anyway, yeah, that's what I'm learning.
Yeah. No, I've definitely learned that lesson myself. There have been so many times in my life, so it's such a good reminder. It's like the strong opinions loosely held. That's how I try to go about my days now. Is like I have a really strong opinion about this, but you could easily sway me. You know,
Well, I don't think
tell me your
I
thoughts.
don't think you or I have ever been wrong. So the fact that we debate,
Never.
it doesn't
No,
even logically make sense.
I
Um,
know you're right.
So, yeah, lots more to come on this topic. We appreciate everybody listening. If you haven't checked out Seeds, please go do it at www.seedsinvestor.com. Fill out the form to follow our newsletter. Find us on LinkedIn and X, and we will see you next time.